when news of Arian's leaked thoughts exploded across the city's holoboards and data streams. He felt as if a swarm of fireflies had burst inside his chest, each one a burning ember of shame and fear. He woke the next morning to an empty inbox and the hollow echo of his own heartbeat, and when he reached for his coffee mug, his trembling hand caught on the edge of the table and sent it clattering to the floor. As the dark liquid seeped into the cracks of the worn floor tiles, Arian's breath hitched, and he realized with a jolt that he could no longer trust even the simplest routines. Every face he passed on the street seemed to flicker with recognition, as if the crowd knew his most secret thoughts, that he feared failure more than death, that he had once cried himself to sleep thinking of his late mother's disappointed smile, and that he longed for someone to truly see him without judgment. In the bright glare of midday, he walked through the gleaming towers of the corporate district, but his reflection in the glass walls was a stranger with haunted eyes. Colleagues he had greeted only days before now crossed to the other side of the corridor to avoid his path. Emails offering help turned into polite refusals, and the few messages of support were drowned out by waves of mockery in the tech forums he had once frequented. A particularly cruel message on a public board had read, "Nothing private in your head? Neither do we," followed by laughing emojis that felt like shards of glass cutting into his confidence. His research funding was put on hold. Demanded to see a full security audit of the MindLink system. Arian could only press his forehead against his palm and replay the moment when the headset betrayed him. At night, sleep became a battleground where his own subconscious threw him into vivid dreams of thousands of eyes watching as he stripped his mind bare. He would wake gasping, sweat-soaked and disoriented, with the city's distant hum leaking through his closed window like a reminder of endless ears listening. Desperate for relief, he began to scour the lowest corners of the city's data network, hoping to find a digital loophole, a hacker's backdoor he could exploit to stop the broadcast. His search led him to whispered rumors of a place in the underbelly known as the Echo Bazaar, a neon-lit bazaar of discarded hardware, rogue programmers, and off-the-grid thinkers. There, he heard, someone might have the skills to help a man whose own mind had become enemy territory. Late one evening, Arian found himself walking down a narrow alley, slick with recent rain, the neon of broken signs reflecting in puddles like scattered pieces of his fractured confidence. He pressed a palm against the damp brick wall, his fingers, leaving an imprint of nervous sweat, and wondered if he was chasing a ghost or if the whispers of the bazaar were real. The air smelled of ozone, fried circuits, and street food. He could no longer taste a bitter reminder that the simplest pleasures had been stolen along with his privacy. Yet even as doubt gnawed at him, he felt a small spark of determination flicker in his chest. He was a scientist by training and a problem solver by nature. If the public MindLink feed could be hijacked, perhaps it could be rerouted, rewritten, or blocked. And if someone in the shadowy corners of the city knew how to remain hidden from the network's prying eyes, then Arian would find that person. He tightened the grip on his coat, straightened his shoulders despite the weariness that weighed like lead in his limbs, and took a steadying breath. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with risk, but the thought of surrendering to despair was far worse. Somewhere in the echoing alleys of the bazaar, hope waited behind a flickering light. And so Arian Patel, carrying the burden of every thought he had ever hidden, stepped forward into the unknown, determined to reclaim his mind, and prove that even the darkest exposure could be the catalyst for humanity's greatest innovations. When Arian Patel first slipped on the sleek silver headset in his cluttered lab, he felt a flutter of excitement, a promise that his groundbreaking MindLink research would finally pay off. He settled into the worn leather chair, adjusted the thin wires against his temples, and activated the device. At first, all was quiet in his mind, the soft hum of machinery, the faint echo of his own breathing. But as the neural interface awakened, a strange warmth spread across his forehead. And images began to dance behind his eyelids, his memories, his private hopes, the secret fear that he would never be good enough. Panicked, he reached up to powered down the headset, only to discover that the emergency switch had no effect. His thoughts continued streaming, visible to an unseen audience somewhere in the digital maze beyond his lab's walls. Arian's heart pounded so fiercely it felt as if it might burst free from his chest. He imagined faces peering into his mind, skeptical investors, mocking colleagues, even the strangers in the city's crowded streets. His cheeks burned with shame at the intimate details now exposed his anxieties about failing his late mothers. Expectations. The poem he'd written for himself in the quiet hours before dawn. The private prayer he whispered at night, begging for courage. Every unspoken word was laid bare, like pages torn from a diary and scattered before the world. Desperate, Arian stumbled backward, knocking over a pile of research notes. Graphs and equations swirled to the floor, symbols of all he had worked. For slipping from his grasp, he pressed his palm against his forehead, as though he could block the invasive stream of consciousness with sheer force of will. But his own thoughts betrayed him, each one a siren's call that broadcast his deepest insecurities. He clenched his fists and closed his eyes, willing the device to shut off. But when he opened them again, the flickering neon lights of his monitors revealed a single message blinking across the main screen. Connection established. Live feed active. A cold dread settled in his stomach, and his chest tightened. In that moment, Arian understood that this was no simple malfunction. Something had hijacked his invention, turning his most private sanctuary into a stage for the unknown. He felt outrage rise, but it was tangled with a more vulnerable emotion, loneliness. He had spent years in solitude testing prototypes and chasing theories, convinced that his breakthrough would bring him approval. Now alone in the semi-darkness of the lab, he realized that approval meant nothing if it came at the price of every unguarded thought he had ever held. He sank to the floor, back against the cold metal of his desk, and let his head fall into his hands. The hum of the machines seemed to whisper, "You are seen, cannot hide." Tears welled in his eyes as he grappled with the reality that his mind was no longer his own. And yet beneath the fear and the shame flickered a small ember of determination. Arian Patel was a researcher, a problem solver. If someone had found a way to breach mental privacy, then someone could find a way to seal it once more. He pushed himself up, his legs trembling, and scanned the lab for any clue: a loose wire, an index of network traffic, a glimmer of code in the dark terminal windows. The lab smelled of ozone and old paper, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and steadied himself. The path ahead was uncertain, and the audience of unseen minds waited for his next thought. But Arian Patel would not give them that pleasure. He would fight to protect his mind, and in the battle to come, he would discover that the greatest innovations often rose from the ashes of our deepest fears. When Arian stepped onto the crowded Skytram platform, the roar of magnetized engines and the shuffling feet of commuters pressed against him like a living tide. He tried to merge into the flow of bodies, to become nothing more than a face lost among thousands, but the weight of his exposed mind made every glance feel like an accusation. His pulse hammered in his ears as he leaned against a steel pillar and closed his eyes, willing the wild ping of neural feedback to still. Instead, a soft, urgent whisper floated into his consciousness, so quiet that at first he thought it another hallucination born of stress. "You don't have to face them alone," the voice said, gentle and warm, like a lantern's glow in a midnight storm. Arian's eyes snapped open. He scanned the crowd, but every person looked away, caught in their own digital routines. Number one seemed to speak, yet the whisper continued, threading through his thoughts like a melody. His heart lurched as relief and disbelief warred inside him. Was someone else adapting to the hijacked network? Someone shielding their mind and finding a way to hear his? He turned toward a street-level exit, following the whisper's silent current. Spotted her. A woman perched on an upturned crate beside a flickering hall advertisement for the very mind-link device that betrayed him. She wore a leather jacket patched with neon circuitry scraps and ripped jeans stained with paint. Her hair was cut close at the sides, leaving a mohawk of iridescent strands that shimmered whenever she tilted. Her eyes, a vivid green, held a curious intensity as she watched him approach. "You must be Arian," she said aloud, though her lips barely moved. Relief washed through him in humid waves, and he sank onto the crate opposite her, heart still. "Racing. How do you know my name?" he asked, voice raspy from fevered nights. She brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and smiled, the sound of laughter echoing softly in his mind rather than his ears. "I've been tracking the feed for months," she replied in that calm, musical tone. "I learned to mute the broadcast to protect myself. Then I heard you." Ariane ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his racing thoughts. The city's ambient noise, the hovercars overhead, the distant chatter of street vendors, the hum of neon signs, faded. As he listened to her whisper, he felt the knot of isolation inside him loosen just a fraction. "Why help me?" he whispered. She tilted her head, and in that moment her eyes shone with fierce compassion. "Because no one should live exposed," she said. "And because your research could help millions reclaim their minds." She stood and offered him a hand. He hesitated, his pride warbling against his desperation, but then he grasped her fingers and let her pull him to his feet. Her grip was steady, grounding him in a way that no amount of data firewalls ever could. Together, they slipped into an alley where neon graffiti streaked the walls in swirling patterns that seemed almost alive. She led him past stacks of discarded hardware-broken drones, smashed holoscreens, frayed cables, until they reached a hidden door emblazoned with a symbol of an ear crossed out. Inside, the air smelled of solder and coffee. Dozens of salvaged. Computers blinked with coded runes, and a small team of hackers hunched over keyboards, heads bowed in concentration. Ariane watched in awe as lines of code scrolled across screens, a digital tapestry woven to resist the MindLink network's probes. The hush in the room was nothing like the silence he had felt in the corporate district. Here, silence was a shield, a promise of safety. The woman Leela. She said her name was guided him to a vacant workstation and gestured to a terminal displaying his headset schematics. "We've replicated your design," she explained, voice soft but confident. "We're building a filter, something that merges our minds to block the feed and send only what we choose." Ariane's chest swelled with hope, and he let himself believe that this was more than a fantasy. As Leela and her team worked, he watched her fingers fly over the keys, marveling at how someone could turn trash into treasure, life rated by technology, transformed into salvation by sheer ingenuity. In that room, surrounded by strangers bound by a common purpose, Ariane felt something he hadn't felt since his mother's funeral, a sense of belonging. The whisper returned, softer this time, and he closed his eyes to hear it clearly. "Together, we are stronger." In that moment, Ariane understood that his fight was no longer solitary. Humanity's greatest strength was not in hiding thoughts, but in choosing to share them with those who listened with kindness and respect. And as the city's neon glow filtered through the grated window, he realized that an alliance born in the shadows might just light the path to a brighter future. Late into the night, Ariane and Layla gathered around a reclaimed workbench in the heart of the hidden studio, the air thick with the scent of solder and fresh coffee. Layla's small team of hackers hovered over tangled cables and half-dissembled headsets, their faces lit by the soft glow of holographic schematics. Ariane watched as Layla gently adjusted the neural sensor array he had designed, then slid a thin, flexible photonic mesh over it, her ingenious addition that could block unwanted signals without cutting off all thought. The first test was simple. Leela placed the headset on a worn foam dummy head, wired to simulate a live MindLink feed. She tapped a series of commands on her portable console, and they held their breath as the mesh flickered to life. Lines of code scrolled across screens in rapid succession, verifying that the blocker module intercepted invasive data packets and rerouted them into a secure buffer. When the feed cut off, the room exhaled together, relief washing over them, like a gentle tide. Encouraged, Ariane asked Layla to try it on herself. She settled into an old swivel chair, placed the headset on her temples, and closed her eyes. Almost instantly, Ariane felt a silence in his mind, a soothing stillness he had not known since the breach. But beneath that calm, there was something new, a soft echo of Leela's own thoughts, a quiet bridge between their minds that felt safe and inviting. He hesitated, then thought, "I trust you." The reply was instant, warm, and clear. "Together, we are free." A thrill of triumph raced through Ariane's chest, mingling with a deeper emotion he barely understood. Gratitude, connection. In that moment, he realized that the neural cloak was more than a shield. It was a promise that humanity could choose what to share, rather than be forced to expose every hidden corner of the mind. Over the following days, they refined the prototype, testing it in crowded markets and noisy transit hubs. Aryan watched as Leela joined a group of street performers, their filtered laughter echoing only for those wearing the cloak, while unsuspecting passers-by heard only the usual bustle. Each successful test kindled hope in Aryan's heart, and, as they worked, he learned more about Leela's past, how she had once been a synapse dynamics engineer who walked away when the company began secret trials on unwilling subjects. Her memories of guilt and courage wove into their collaboration, giving the project a purpose beyond technological prowess. On the nights when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, Leela's quiet presence reminded him why they fought, not for fame or fortune, but for the sanctity of private thought. In her makeshift lab, amid the hum of servers and the heartbeat of soldering irons, Aryan felt something he had not known since childhood: belonging. He recalled his mother's soft hands guiding his first steps in science, her belief in kindness, and respect above all. Now he honored her memory each time he tweaked a circuit or penned a new line of code. As the final days of the prototype phase approached, Lila suggested one more feature: a shared node that would allow small groups to form private thought circles. It's like whispered conversations in the dark, impervious to outside listeners. Aryan hesitated, fearing complexity might undermine the shield's purpose. But when he saw the hopeful spark in Leela's green eyes, he agreed. Together, they wove the node into the neural mesh, testing it with friends they trusted to professors, a mechanic and a journalist, all of whom found solace in speaking truths they had hidden for years. The studio buzzed with excitement as the group exchanged hidden jokes, memories of loss, and dreams for the future, secure in their mental sanctuary. Late one evening, after the tests, Aryan and Leela stood alone by the large grated window overlooking the city's neon glow. He placed a hand on her shoulder, the lightweight mesh humming softly beneath his fingers. "We did it," he whispered, voice thick with awe. She smiled, her lips curving into a gentle crescent. "No," she replied, her voice a soft echo. In both their minds in the quiet night, we did it. And as the city pulsed below, two minds joined in a shared moment of triumph, reminding Aryan that innovation born of compassion could transform the world, and that, together, humanity would never again be forced to choose between silence and exposure. Late one morning, Aryan and Leela decided it was time to test the neural cloak under real pressure. So they slipped into the crowded central plaza, where halids flashed and hover taxis zoomed overhead, each step echoing their nervous excitement. Clad in simple wristbands linked to the cloak's secure node, they blended into a sea of commuters, their hearts pounding as they wondered if the shield would hold against the MindLink network's deepest probes. Leela clasped Aryan's hand and gave a small nod, her green eyes shining with quiet confidence. Sand together, they waded into the press of people. At first, nothing happened. The usual roar of thoughts washed past them like distant static, but their minds felt safe, contained within a soft bubble of silence. A small group of onlookers tried speaking with them telepathically, but only met a gentle echo of their own friendly greetings, as if the cloak reflected rather than revealed. The success buoyed their spirits, and for a moment they shared triumphant glances. Then, from one of the glass-walled corporate towers overlooking the plaza, a platoon of Synapse Dynamics agents emerged, tall figures in dark uniforms, their helmets gleaming in the midday sun. Aryan's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the emblem stitched on their shoulders. He tightened his grip on Leela's hand and tried to step back, but the crowd thinned too slowly. The agents fanned out, their leader raising a gloved hand and sending a sharp mental command: "Secure them." Suddenly, the plaza's gentle mind chatter twisted into sharp commands that cut through the cloak like a blade. Aryan staggered as invasive thoughts crashed against his shield, and he felt a wave of panic when he realized that Synapse Dynamics had updated their protocols to counter the prototype. Layla winced, her mental calm flickering for the first time since they activated the mesh. But then, something remarkable happened. The the shield adapted. Lines of code they had written in the hidden studio unfolded in real time, rerouting the agent's commands into a loop of gentle empathy. The agents froze as soft feelings of understanding and compassion washed over them, visions of childhood laughter, memories of a loved one's touch, the warmth of friendship. One by one, their hostile stances slackened, and the leader lowered his weapon, eyes wide as if awoken from a bad dream. The plaza grew silent, save for the distant hum of hovercraft, and a hush fell over the crowd as they sensed the shift. Arian felt sweat bead on his brow as he and Leela stood back to back, hearts racing. But as the empathy wave spread outward, the plaza seemed to breathe with relief. Strangers offered them nods of approval and whispered thanks that drifted into their minds with unexpected clarity. The Synapse agents looked at each other in confusion, then removed their helmets, revealing faces etched with surprise and a hint of regret. Their leader approached, voice steady, though his mind slowed by compassion. "Your technology, it's more powerful than we feared," he said. "It can unite, but we meant it to divide." Arian swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing on him. "We never intended harm," he replied, voice clear. "We only wanted choice." Leela stepped forward, her posture calm but resolute. "People should decide what to share," she said softly, "not corporations." Around them the crowd murmured in agreement. The agents lowered their heads and one by one signaled their squad to stand down. In that charged moment, Arian felt a swell of pride, not just for the technology, but for the compassion it could inspire. He and Leela exchanged a look that needed no words. They had turned fear into hope and shown that humanity's unity was a force stronger than any invasive network. As the agents retreated, escorted by bystanders who now regarded them with cautious kindness rather than suspicion, Arian realized that this confrontation marked a turning point. The corporate shadow had tried to crush their invention, but instead, it had demonstrated its true potential to heal, to protect, and to remind every mind that beneath our differences lies a shared humanity worth defending. And as the plaza's neon signs flickered in the afternoon light, Arian and Leela stood side by side, hearts full of determination, ready to bring the neural cloak to the world and ensure that no one's thoughts would ever again be held hostage by fear. Late the next morning, news of the plaza confrontation spread like wildfire through the twisting data streams of the city. And Arian Patel woke to a flood of messages, grateful notes from strangers whose minds he and Leela had protected, cautious. Inquiries from small tech cooperatives eager to test the neural cloak, and, most surprisingly, an official invitation from the Global Privacy Summit, where world leaders and innovators would gather in 10 days' time. He read the invitation, with trembling excitement, feeling the weight of possibility settle in his chest like a warm glow. For years, his research had been confined to this hidden studio's flickering lights and whispered code, but now it could step onto a larger stage. As he looked across the cluttered workbench at Leela, she offered him a steady smile that shone brighter than any halad. Together, they packed up their prototype with its slim photonic mesh and compact neural filter node, carefully cradling each component like a promise of a new dawn. In the days that followed, the basement studio buzzed with preparations. Volunteers helped build demonstration units. The small hacker collective organized encrypted feeds for live testing, and Arian himself scripted a short speech, aiming to balance the technical details with stories of people who had rediscovered joy in private thoughts. He practiced each line in front of a cracked mirror, tasting the words on his tongue until they felt ready. When the morning of the summit arrived, a chill wind swept through the marble columns of the conference hall, and Arian's heart pounded as he and Layla stepped onto the stage before a sea of expectant faces. Cameras hovered like silent birds, and the crowd leaned forward, hungry for hope. He began by sharing a simple truth, that privacy was not a luxury, but a human right. As he spoke, he saw soft nods ripple across the audience, eyes bright with empathy, minds hungry for change. Then came the moment of proof. Arian and Leela each donned a demonstration headset wired by their team, activated the neural cloak, and invited a volunteer, an elderly professor, reluctantly curious to share a cherished memory aloud. The professor spoke of childhood wonder, fishing with his grandfather by moonlight. The lantern's glow dancing on the water, Grandson's laughter echoing in the still night. For everyone watching through standard links, the volunteer's visage remained a noble statue of calm, but on the secure feed. The audience at the summit heard only the professor's words and saw the gentle glow in his eyes, nothing of the anxiety that had knotted his brow before the cloak's protection. A hush fell, then applause like rolling thunder, not for the technology alone, but for the humanity it safeguarded. As ministers and entrepreneurs rushed forward with offers of partnership, Arian felt a lightness in his chest. He had never known relief, pride, and a fierce gratitude for the woman who had whispered hope into his mind when he feared he was utterly alone. Yet even in that heady moment, a quiet concern flickered. Beyond the summit's walls lay a world still grappling with fear of change. Corporate interests hungry to exploit every invention, and the stark reality that widespread adoption would require trust built one mind at a time. Layla sensed his worry and squeezed his hand beneath the podium, her touch wordless reassurance. They had crossed a threshold, no longer hidden rebels, but pioneers thrust into the world's bright glare. Together, they stepped off the stage, into a future, unwritten, determined to nurture the fragile ember of trust they had sparked. Knowing that in every shared thought, protected by their neural shield, lay the promise of a stronger, kinder humanity. In the weeks following the Global Privacy Summit, Arian and Leela found themselves at the center of a movement that grew faster than they ever imagined. Every morning, messages arrived from people across continents, families who could finally hold gentle conversations without fear of eavesdroppers, teachers who shared creative ideas with students in safe mind circles, artists who painted vivid dreams in thought galleries shielded by the neural cloak. As they read each note, a warmth bloomed in their chests. Layla would look up from her console, green eyes shining with pride, and Arian would smile back, proud of how far they had come together. One clear dawn, they received an invitation to visit a remote settlement on the edge of human-controlled space. A small colony of researchers, explorers, and settlers had developed their own mind-linked networks to solve problems in harsh environments. But fear of leaks had stifled their progress, while they begged Arian and Lila to help integrate the neural cloak into their systems. Without hesitation, the two packed a secure prototype and set off for the settlement. Passing through starlit corridors and docking in a station that hovered above rocky hills, on their first day, they met Dr. Samuel Boone, the colony's lead scientist whose deep wrinkles spoke of many sleepless nights trying to solve water purification issues. He guided them to a lab carved into native stone, where glowing algae pulsed in glass tanks. As Arian and Leela connected the prototype to the local network, they felt the familiar hum of anticipation. Leela closed her eyes and whispered a greeting into their linked minds. And immediately the settlement's scientists replied, voices layered in cautious excitement and relief. Dr. Boone's eyes filled with tears when he realized he could share his frustrations and hopes without exposing personal fears. Lila slipped an arm around Arian's waist, and he squeezed her hand, feeling both gratitude and love light his heart. That evening, the colony held a small celebration under the settlement's twin moons. A soft breeze carried the scent of alien wildflowers, and lamps made from polished crystal cast gentle light on simple wooden tables. Arian and Layla sat between Dr. Boone and his assistant Lena, who beamed as she described new experiments she has planned to run. People passed bowls of spiced fruits and bread baked by solar ovens. Laughter rose like music, and for a moment, Arian thought he might float away on the joy of shared trust. Later, as the party wound down, Arian and Layla slipped away to a quiet ridge overlooking the settlement's lights. The moons cast silver paths across the hills, and the air felt soft against their skin. Layla leaned her head on Arian's shoulder and exhaled deeply. "We've given them more than technology," she whispered. "We've given them the freedom to be human." Arian wrapped his arm around her and looked out at the sparkling colony. He thought of where they started in a cramped, hidden studio filled with broken screens, and whispered code and how they had transformed fear into something beautiful. "And they'll take it further," he replied. "They always do." His voice trembled with hope. In the quiet night, they made a promise to continue building tools that honored privacy, strengthened empathy, and connected hearts across every divide. They spoke of publishing open-source designs so communities everywhere could adapt the cloak to their needs. They planned workshops, online tutorials, and mentorship programs for young innovators. Their dreams stretched farther than either of them had dared to imagine. As dawn approached, they began the journey home, carrying with them a renewed sense of purpose. Back on Earth, their success at the colony would inspire new collaborations, scientists forging peace treaties through thought circles, charities, raising support for mental health by sharing safe introspection, and distant friends rekindling bonds broken by years of silence. Every mind they protected would send ripples of compassion outward, weaving a network of trust stronger than any data firewall. In the transport's gentle hum, Leela pressed her hand to Arian's back. "Look how far we've come," she murmured. He smiled and rested his head against hers. "And we're just beginning," he answered. Together they watched the stars slide past the window, their hearts full of wonder and determination. Humanity, they knew, was capable of greatness, far beyond conquest or profit. It thrived in kindness, courage, and the shared choice to protect the sanctity of every thought. And as they hurtled toward home, Arian and Leela felt a radiant certainty that when minds unite in trust, the future grows brighter than any sunrise.